The desert stretched endlessly, painted in shades of red and gold under the scorching sun. The wind carried whispers of old battles, of warriors who once shed blood on the same sands. And there, in this land forgotten by mercy, lived a man known as Rock, the desert guardian. He wasn't a hero by choice. Rock was a man shaped by pain, discipline, and scars that told stories no one else could see. Born of native blood, raised by a grandfather who taught him the ways of the land, Rock knew how to survive where others perished. Every cactus, every shadow, every whisper of wind was part of his language. The desert was not his prison. It was his kingdom. But kingdoms demand sacrifice. Rock carried more than survival skills. He carried the weight of a past he could never bury. Once he wore the badge of law, fighting for justice with the strength of his fists and the fire of his spirit. Yet one night of rage had changed everything, a fight he never meant to win that way. A man left dead, and Rock, once a protector, became haunted by the taste of his own violence. So he chose exile, a trailer hidden in the desert, a life carved out of solitude. To some he was just a ghost of the law. To others he was the last true warrior, a guardian whose silence was louder than any weapon. But no man can hide forever. And in the silence of the desert, footsteps were already drawing closer, bringing with them betrayal, greed, and a storm that would force Rock to face the one thing he feared most, himself. Rock's past was carved into his very soul. Once, he was a man of the law, a protector who believed justice could still exist in a land poisoned by corruption. But the desert teaches harsh lessons. It strips away illusions, leaving only truth. And Rock's truth was that he had broken the very law he once swore to defend. Years earlier, in a ring of sweat and violence, Rock had let his fury consume him. A fight meant for sport ended in death. The man he struck never rose again. The badge he once carried lost all meaning, and the law he served turned its back on him. But worse than the whispers of betrayal, worse than the headlines and judgment, was the part of himself he discovered that night, the part that enjoyed it. The taste of power, the rush of rage. From that moment on, Rock knew he was no longer fit to enforce justice. He walked away, vanishing into the wilderness, trading society for silence. To him, exile wasn't punishment, it was survival. But the desert doesn't forget, and every shadow reminded him of what he had become, a man who broke his own law, a warrior without a tribe, a guardian stripped of purpose. Yet fate has a way of calling back those who run. And soon Rock's past would come knocking, carrying the voices of old friend and enemies who never forgot his name. The sun was falling over the desert, painting the horizon in blood-red fire when the sound of an old truck broke the silence. Sheriff Larry. A man who wore authority like a mask, but carried greed in his veins. He knew where Rock lived, hidden away in that rusted trailer among the rocks, and he never came without reason. "Rock!" Larry called out, stepping down from the truck, boots sinking into the sand. "You can't stay buried out here forever." Rock didn't answer at first. He sat outside, sharpening the old knife that once belonged to his grandfather, a blade that had tasted survival more than once. The silence was heavier than words. Larry lit a cigarette, his voice cutting the dry air. "There's trouble, and you know it. Claudia and Anthony Valente, ring any bells? They're out there in this desert, running from Santos's men, and the feds. Well, they'd pay good money to get them first, but Santos has already put a bounty on their heads. Big money, Rock, big enough to vanish for good." Rock's eyes lifted, calm but sharp. "Not my fight," Larry smirked. "You keep saying that, but we both know it's a lie. You can't sit out here carving little souvenirs while the world burns. You were born for this. Your blood, your name, your grandfather's legacy, it's in your veins. You're the best tracker I've ever seen. You could find a shadow in the dark. And if you don't help me, I'll be alone out there." The desert wind howled, carrying the weight of unspoken truth. Larry wasn't asking out of duty. He was begging out of fear. Without Rock, he was nothing. But Rock knew the truth. This wasn't about justice. It was about greed, about power, about Larry's endless hunger. And once again, the sheriff was trying to drag him back into a war he no longer wanted to fight. Rock sheathed the knife, stood tall, and with a voice as cold as the desert night said, "I told you before, Larry. I'm done." But in his heart, Rock knew. The fight was already on its way to him. Whispers travel faster than the desert wind, and every whisper carried the same name, Santos. To some, he was just a ghost, a rumor born in the shadows of drug wars. To others, he was a king without a crown, a man whose empire stretched across borders, fueled by blood and cocaine. Larry believed Santos was untouchable. "He's out there," the sheriff muttered, nervously scanning the horizon, watching everything, owning everyone. But Rock knew better. Legends don't survive in the desert without truth buried beneath them, and Santos was no myth. He was very real. The cartel's presence infected everything. Farmers disappeared. Federal agents turned up dead. Money flowed through banks like poison in the bloodstream, and now Claudia and Anthony Valente were at the center of it all. Fugitives carrying not just their lives, but $20 million stolen from Santos himself. For Santos, this wasn't about money. It was about power. No one robbed him and lived to tell the story. His reach stretched across towns, highways, even into the very police meant to stop him. Larry himself, despite his uniform, already smelled of compromise. And Rock. He wanted no part of it. But the whispers of the cartel didn't care about what he wanted. Soon they would arrive at his doorstep, carried by men with guns, greed in their eyes, and orders to bring Claudia and Anthony back, alive or dead. In the desert, you don't go looking for the cartel. The cartel finds you. While Rock fought against his own ghosts and Larry drowned in ambition, far across the burning sands, two figures stumbled through the wasteland. Claudia and Anthony Valente. Claudia was sharp, eyes filled with fire and desperation. She wasn't just running for survival, she was running for justice. Behind her beauty and determination, she carried a dangerous secret. She had stolen millions from the very heart of Santos's empire, laundering his blood-soaked money and hiding it in a Swiss account only she could touch. $20 million, her only weapon against a man who ruled through fear. Beside her, Anthony struggled with every step. Innocent, fragile, yet loyal beyond measure. He wasn't built for the cruelty of the desert, but he trusted his sister with his life. She had cared for him since their mother's death, shielding him from a world that mocked his weakness. To Claudia, Anthony wasn't just her brother. He was her reason to keep fighting. Every mile they walked, the desert pressed harder against them. Heat burned their skin, thirst clawed at their throats, and yet behind them, the real danger grew closer. Santos's men. Ruthless, tireless, they hunted like wolves in the night, armed with promises of reward and the scent of blood. Claudia knew they couldn't stop. Every pause meant death. Every shadow could hide betrayal. Her heart raced with a single prayer. If we can just reach Phoenix, maybe we'll find safety. Maybe someone will believe us. But Phoenix was far, and the desert doesn't forgive the desperate. Night fell heavy on the desert, a blanket of shadows pierced only by the silver of the moon. Inside his trailer, Rock sat in silence, staring at the old photographs scattered across the worn wooden table. One was of his father, who never came back from Vietnam. Another of his grandfather, the man who taught him the ways of the desert. And then, the last one, a memory he wished he could burn, the night he took a man's life in the ring. The crowd had cheered. The lights had blinded him. His fists had moved faster than thought. And when the body fell limp, the silence that followed was louder than any applause. It was the silence of guilt, the silence that whispered, "You are not a hero. You are a killer." Rock carried that weight every day. The knife his grandfather gave him wasn't just a tool, it was a reminder. A symbol of survival, yes, but also of the code he had broken. His grandfather had taught him that a true warrior fights to protect, not to destroy. Rock had crossed that line. He had become the very thing he once swore to fight. The desert had been his refuge, a place where the whispers of the past could drown in the wind. But even here, alone among the dunes, the ghosts followed. He heard them in the coyotes' howls, saw them in the shifting sands, felt them in every scar across his body. And now, with Larry knocking at his door and the cartel tightening its grip, Rock realized the truth. He could no longer hide. The past he had tried to bury was rising from the sand, demanding he face it, one last time. The desert has a way of weaving destinies together, as if the endless dunes were threads in the hands of fate. And it was on one of those scorching afternoons that Rock's solitary path collided with Claudia and Anthony's desperate flight. He spotted them first, two silhouettes stumbling against the horizon, the heat waves bending their shapes like ghosts. Rock could have ignored them, let them vanish into the sands, but something in Anthony's fragile steps and Claudia's determined grip pulled him closer. These weren't wanderers, they were fugitives, and trouble followed fugitives like vultures follow death. Claudia froze when she saw him. Her eyes, sharp as blades, scanned the stranger with suspicion. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse from thirst. Rock didn't answer at first. He simply studied them, noting the exhaustion, the fear in their movements, the way Anthony clung to his sister's arm. Finally, he spoke, calm and heavy like the desert night. "Lost travelers don't last long out here. You'll need water, shelter, or you'll die before the sun rises again." Anthony's innocence broke through the tension. You live here? In the desert?" His voice carried wonder, not fear. Rock gave the faintest nod, long enough to know its cruelty. Claudia's suspicion only deepened. She knew men like this, men who lived by their own rules, who answered to no one. Dangerous men. But with Santos's hunters closing in, even danger looked like salvation. Their paths had crossed not by chance, but by destiny. And from that moment on, whether they trusted each other or not, their stories were bound together, by survival, by betrayal, and by blood. That night, under the dim light of a campfire, Claudia finally revealed the truth, a truth heavy enough to shift the desert winds. Her hands trembled as she clutched the canteen Rock had offered. The water soothed her throat, but not her conscience. She knew sooner or later Rock deserved to know why death itself was chasing them. "It's not just Santos's men after us," she whispered, her voice sharp but quivering. "It's his money, $20 million. I took it." Anthony's wide eyes darted toward her. "Claudia," he whispered nervously, as if saying it aloud would summon the cartel from the shadows. Rock's gaze hardened. "You stole from Santos?" His voice carried no judgment, only the weight of reality. "That's not theft. That's a death sentence." Claudia clenched her jaw, fire flashing in her eyes. "I laundered his blood money. I saw everything, the corporations, the fake accounts, the banks that bent the knee to his empire. And when I realized how deep it ran, I made a choice. I took what I could and I hid it. $20 million in a Swiss account. Money I can control, money he can never touch without me." The fire crackled as silence fell. The secret hung heavy between them, more dangerous than any weapon. Anthony broke it softly, almost childlike. "She did it for us. For me. She wanted us free." Rock leaned back, the firelight flickering across his face. He had lived long enough to know what such a secret meant. It wasn't just greed or survival, it was war. And war always came with a price. From that moment, Rock understood. Their fight wasn't just about running. It was about standing against a man whose power reached across nations. And with Claudia's secret out, the desert had just become a battlefield. The desert has no walls, no doors, yet betrayal always finds a way in. As Claudia's secret spread from lips to wind, Santos's network moved faster than any storm. Money buys loyalty, but fear keeps it. And in Santos's empire, there was plenty of both. While Rock, Claudia, and Anthony tried to rest, a different meeting was taking place under the veil of night. Sheriff Larry, the same man who begged Rock for help, sat across from men whose eyes glowed with greed. He had always told himself he was doing it for justice, for control, but deep down it was never about the law. It was about survival, and survival had a price. One of Santos's lieutenants slid an envelope across the table. Inside, promises of wealth. Outside, promises of protection. "Bring us Claudia and Anthony," the man said coldly. "Alive. Santos wants her to watch before she dies. The boy doesn't matter." Larry swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his brow. He knew Santos never made empty threats. If he refused, his own grave would be waiting in the sand. If he agreed, he could live, but at the cost of betraying the only man who had ever called him a friend. By dawn, Larry's choice was clear. He would track Rock, Claudia, and Anthony, not to save them, but to deliver them. And as he drove back through the desert, dust rising behind him like ghosts, one thought haunted his mind. Maybe Rock will forgive me, but Santos never would. In the desert, shadows don't just hide enemies, they hide traitors. The first light of dawn spilled over the desert like fire over stone. The air was dry, heavy with the promise of violence. Rock knew it before he even heard it, the faint rumble in the distance, the engines cutting through the silence. Santos's men were coming. Claudia gripped Anthony's hand, her eyes scanning the endless horizon. "They found us," she whispered, her voice trembling, but her spirit unbroken. Anthony's breathing quickened. He was fragile, but he tried to stand tall because he knew his sister needed him strong, even if just for show. Rock's instincts sharpened. Years of tracking, of fighting, of surviving in this wasteland had taught him the rhythm of hunters. These men weren't guessing, and they were following a trail, Larry's trail. Within minutes, dust clouds rose behind black trucks, their tires spitting sand like bullets. Gun barrels glinted under the rising sun. Shouts carried through the air, commands in Spanish and English, the language of killers who served only money. "Move!" Rock barked, pulling Claudia and Anthony toward the jagged rocks that broke the flat desert floor. They ran, stumbling over sand and stone, the desert itself fighting against their escape. Bullets cracked through the silence, ripping into the earth just inches from their feet. Anthony fell, his cry echoing like thunder. Claudia rushed to him, but Rock's hand was faster, pulling them both behind cover. His grandfather's knife was in his grip now, not just a weapon, but a promise. The chase had begun, and in this desert there would be no mercy, only the hunted and the hunters. The sun climbed higher, burning down on them with merciless fury. The desert was no longer just a battlefield, it was an enemy in itself. Every breath seared the lungs, every step dragged like iron chains. Claudia held Anthony close, shielding him as best she could, while Rock scanned the horizon for shelter. But shelter was not the only thing they needed. They needed trust. And trust was harder to find than water in the desert. Claudia's eyes burned with suspicion. "Why are you helping us?" she demanded, voice sharp, nearly breaking under the weight of fear. "You don't know us. You don't owe us." Rock's answer was simple, his tone calm, almost detached. "Because the desert doesn't forgive the weak, and neither do men like Santos. Out here, survival doesn't come from walking alone." But Anthony, ever innocent, saw something his sister could not. His eyes, wide and curious, studied Rock not as a stranger, but as a protector. "He's different, Claudia," Anthony said softly, tugging her sleeve. "He's not like the others. He saved us." Claudia wanted to believe him, but her past had been poisoned by lies, betrayals, and false saviors. And in Rock's silence, she saw a man who carried secrets deeper than the desert itself. Meanwhile, Rock kept his focus forward, though inside he felt the weight of their distrust. He knew he wasn't their hero. He wasn't anyone's hero anymore. But in that moment, under the blazing sun, he realized something he hadn't felt in years: responsibility. Trust was fragile, yes, but it was also the only thread holding them together as the hunters closed in. Anthony's small frame struggled against the merciless desert. His steps dragged, his breaths came shallow, and the heat painted his face with exhaustion. Claudia clung to him desperately, whispering words of courage, even as her own strength began to fade. To anyone else, Anthony looked weak, fragile, even helpless, but Rock saw something different. Beneath the boy's trembling body was a heart that refused to quit. Every time Anthony stumbled, he pulled himself back up. Every time fear shadowed his eyes, he looked to his sister and forced a smile as if to tell her, "I'll keep going for you." As they paused for a moment in the shade of a jagged rock, Claudia knelt by her brother. "Just a little further," she whispered, stroking his hair. "We'll make it, I promise." Anthony's lips trembled, but his words carried a surprising strength. "I'm not afraid, Claudia. Not if you're with me." Rock turned away, pretending not to listen, but the words cut deep. He had seen warriors twice Anthony's size crumble under fear, yet here was this boy, carrying a spirit fiercer than most men. Fragile in body, yes, but unbreakable in loyalty. For the first time, Rock felt more than obligation. He felt admiration. Perhaps Anthony was not meant to wield a knife or fire a gun. Perhaps his strength was something rarer, something purer, the kind that gave others the will to keep fighting. And in that moment, Rock silently vowed, as long as he drew breath, no harm would come to the boy. Not while he still had the strength of his ancestors running through his veins. The desert night had begun to fall, and with it came a cold that cut sharper than knives. The fire flickered between them, but no flame could burn away the fear in Claudia's eyes. She stared at Rock, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with urgency. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "Santos isn't just another criminal. He owns the law. He owns the police. He owns everything he touches. If he finds us, if he finds Anthony—" Her voice broke as she looked at her brother, who had finally fallen asleep beside her, his fragile chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Rock's expression didn't change. He kept sharpening his grandfather's knife, the sound of steel on stone echoing into the silence, but his silence only fueled her desperation. "You think you can fight him?" Claudia pressed, her voice now sharp, almost accusing. "You think you can protect us out here alone? Santos has men everywhere, men who kill without hesitation. I saw it with my own eyes, and if they catch us, they'll make me watch before they take Anthony's life, do you hear me? They'll kill him first and then me." Her words pierced the night like gunfire. For a moment, Rock's hands stilled, his gaze lifted, dark and unreadable. Claudia leaned closer, her face etched with fire and fear. "Please," she whispered, "don't just walk away. Don't pretend you can stay out of this. Help us. If not for me, then for him." The plea wasn't just desperation. It was surrender. Claudia, who had fought so hard to protect her brother alone, was finally admitting she couldn't do it anymore. And in that fragile moment, Rock saw something he hadn't in years. Trust being offered, raw and unguarded. The desert was cruel, but Claudia's words were sharper still. And Rock knew whether he liked it or not, his fate was now tied to theirs. The firelight glinted against the blade Rock held in his hands, an old knife, worn but unbroken, passed down from his grandfather. Its handle was carved with symbols of their people, marks of strength, loyalty, and survival. To anyone else it was just steel. To Rock, it was blood and memory. Anthony, still fighting against sleep, noticed the shine. His childlike curiosity cut through the tension. "That knife, where did you get it?" he asked softly, eyes wide with wonder. Rock hesitated. He rarely spoke of his grandfather, but something in Anthony's innocent gaze opened a door long kept shut. "It belonged to him," Rock said finally, "the greatest tracker this desert ever knew. They say he could follow a salmon upstream at night, blindfolded." Anthony's eyes sparkled. "And he gave it to you?" Rock nodded, but his voice grew heavier. "He told me a knife like this isn't just for killing. It's a reminder. A warrior fights to protect, not to destroy." Claudia listened in silence, her suspicion tempered by curiosity. She studied the way Rock's rough hands gripped the blade, not with pride, but with reverence, as if it was more burden than weapon. Anthony leaned closer, whispering as though afraid to break the spell. "And do you protect people with it?" Rock's eyes lingered on the fire, haunted shadows flickering across his face. Finally he spoke, almost to himself. "I've used it to survive. I've used it to fight. But whether I've protected anyone, I don't know anymore." For the first time, Claudia saw past the silence, past the scars. Rock wasn't just a hardened man of the desert. He was someone still wrestling with the legacy of his blood, the weight of choices that never stopped bleeding. The knife was more than a weapon, it was a lesson. One Rock had yet to prove, but perhaps with Claudia and Anthony, he would have the chance. The desert has no mercy. It doesn't forgive mistakes, and it doesn't grant second chances. Rock had learned this as a boy at his grandfather's side. Survival wasn't about strength alone, it was about discipline, instinct, and respect for the land. As Claudia and Anthony huddled close to the fire, Rock's voice broke the silence, low and steady. Out here you don't fight the desert. You listen to it. You move when it tells you, you rest when it allows you, ignore that, and you're dead before sunrise. Claudia looked at him skeptical. You make it sound like the desert is alive. Rock's eyes narrowed, reflecting the fire. It is, and it watches. Always. He began to show them small things, things that could mean the difference between life and death. How to read the faint shift of wind across the sand, to know when a storm was coming. How to recognize a plant that held water deep in its roots. How to move at night using the stars, not the horizon, as your guide. Anthony listened with rapt attention, soaking up every word. His fragile body may have been failing, but his spirit burned with curiosity. He wanted to learn, to prove that he wasn't just a burden. Rock noticed, though he said nothing. He remembered his grandfather's words. A warrior is not the one who kills, but the one who endures. For Claudia, each lesson was another reminder of how alien this world felt. She had grown up among money, cities, and lies. Now survival meant trusting a man who lived by a code older than her own fears. The desert had stripped them bare. No wealth, no power, no law could help them here. Only Rock's code stood between them and the endless silence of the sand. And as Santos's men closed in, Claudia realized that the warrior's code was not just about survival. It was about preparing for war. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and silence fell heavy across the desert camp. But then it came, the eerie howl of coyotes echoing through the canyons, piercing the night like a warning. Anthony stirred, his eyes wide with fear. They sound close, he whispered, clutching his sister's arm. Claudia pulled him closer, trying to steady his trembling hands. Rock, however, didn't flinch. He sat with his grandfather's knife resting across his lap, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. Coyotes don't hunt the strong, he said calmly. They circle, they test, they wait for weakness. Show them fear, and they'll close in. Show them fire, and they'll scatter. Almost on cue, faint eyes glowed in the dark, moving low to the ground. Shapes shifted in the shadows. A pack. Anthony's breathing quickened, his innocence colliding with primal terror. Claudia's grip tightened. Rock tossed a burning branch into the sand a few feet away. The flames crackled, sending sparks into the air. The coyotes halted, their howls turning to whimpers before fading back into the night. Anthony let out the breath he didn't realize he was holding. They're gone. Rock's gaze remained on the horizon. For now, predators always come back, whether they walk on 4 legs or 2. His words sank deep into Claudia's mind. Santos's men were closer than ever. The coyotes were just a reminder. The desert was full of hunters, and not all of them howled. As the night grew colder, Claudia realized something chilling. The animals weren't the most dangerous things lurking in the dark. Men were, and soon they would come. The desert was silent again, but inside Rock's chest a storm raged. He sat apart from the others, his back against the cold stone, staring into the dying fire as though it held the answers to a past he could never outrun. Claudia's words echoed in his mind. Help us. If not for me, then for him. He wanted to believe he could. But deep down, Rock knew the truth. He was not the protector she thought he was. He was a man broken by choices that still bled inside him. Images flashed behind his eyes. The ring, the crowd, the man falling, his fists covered in blood. The silence afterward that screamed louder than any cheer. He had been trained to fight with discipline, but in that moment, rage had taken control. And the part of him that liked it terrified him more than the act itself. He had left the badge behind not because the law had failed him, but because he had failed the law, failed himself, failed the code his grandfather had sworn him to uphold. Anthony stirred in his sleep, murmuring something incoherent, and Claudia adjusted his blanket. Rock watched them quietly. A sister fighting for her brother, a boy fighting against weakness with nothing but heart. They reminded him of something he once had: family, loyalty, innocence, things the world had stripped from him long ago. For the first time in years, Rock felt the sting of longing, the desire not just to survive, but to protect, to atone. But that same desire carried danger, because every time Rock fought, the darkness inside him awoke, and he feared that when the time came to fight for Claudia and Anthony, he wouldn't know where survival ended, and the beast within him began. The following day, the desert sun rose mercilessly, burning the horizon in shades of fire. Rock, Claudia, and Anthony pressed forward, their strength waning but their resolve unbroken. Yet what awaited them wasn't just heat or hunger. It was deception. From the distance came the sound of hymns, voices carried by the wind. At first it seemed almost holy, a choir in the wilderness. But Rock's instincts stiffened. In the desert, salvation rarely comes singing. They appeared like a mirage, a band of men dressed as prophets, robes flowing, crosses swaying from their necks. Leading them was a tall man who called himself Reverend Carson. His voice was sweet, like honey, dripping with scripture, his smile warm as he stretched his hands wide. "Children of the desert," he proclaimed, "the Lord has guided you to us. You are weary, but take heart, for we are shepherds of his flock, and we bring peace." Anthony's eyes lit up with hope, but Rock's jaw tightened. He saw the glint of steel beneath the robes, the restless twitch of men trained to kill. These were no prophets. These were wolves wearing the cloth of saints. Claudia pulled Anthony behind her, suspicion sharpening her voice. "Who sent you?" Carson's smile widened, his words shifting like venom under silk. "We are but messengers, and the message is this: return with us, and Santos will show mercy. Resist, and the desert will claim your bones." The masks of holiness slipped, and suddenly the hymns turned to threats. The so-called apostles drew blades, their eyes burning not with faith, but with greed. Rock stepped forward, the knife of his grandfather gleaming in his hand. "Mercy doesn't live in men like Santos," he growled. The prophets dropped their disguises, and in the heart of the desert, the false shepherds revealed themselves as executioners. The desert was about to be baptized, not in holy water but in blood. The first blade came fast, slicing through the air with a hiss. Rock moved quicker, his grandfather's knife flashing in the sunlight. Steel met steel, and the desert rang with the sound of battle. The robes of prophets tore open, revealing the truth. Beneath the cloth were killers, hardened and merciless, sent to drag Claudia and Anthony back into Santos's chains. Claudia pulled Anthony to the ground, shielding him with her body as chaos erupted around them. The false Reverend Carson stood back, smiling like a serpent, watching his men do the devil's work. Sand exploded under boot and blade. Rock fought with precision, every strike economical, every movement flowing with the instincts of a man born to survive. He wasn't fighting for glory. He wasn't fighting for redemption. He was fighting for them, for Claudia and Anthony. A fist struck his jaw. Another blade grazed his arm, but Rock didn't falter. He used the desert itself as his ally, kicking sand into his enemy's eyes, dragging one man into the fire pit, striking with the force of a storm. Blood stained the ground, dark against the pale sand, marking the battlefield like a grim covenant. Carson finally stepped forward, his voice still dripping with mockery. "You can't save them, warrior. You'll die here, and your bones will join the desert." Rock's eyes burned with defiance as he pressed his blade against the throat of the last man standing. His voice was a growl, deep and unyielding. "I've buried men like you before, and I'll bury Santos next." The silence that followed was broken only by Anthony's trembling breath. Claudia clutched him tightly, tears in her eyes, not of weakness, but of rage. They had survived this fight, but it was only the beginning. The desert had been baptized, just as Rock predicted. And now the sands carried the scent of blood. The desert fell eerily silent after the clash with Carson's men, but Rock knew it was only the calm before a greater storm. Blood on the sand always drew scavengers, and in this wasteland, the scavengers weren't coyotes. They were men with guns, greed, and no conscience. As they pressed forward, Claudia could feel it in her bones, eyes watching from the distance, whispers carried on the wind. Santos's network stretched far, and every step closer to safety was also a step deeper into his reach. Anthony, though exhausted, tried to lighten the weight. "Maybe they're gone," he murmured, forcing a hopeful smile. But Rock's gaze remained cold, fixed on the horizon. Hunters don't disappear. They close in, slowly, quietly, until you realize you've been walking into their teeth. By dusk, Rock's fears were confirmed. Tracks in the sand, heavy boots, recent, circling like vultures. He crouched low, running his fingers across the trail, his instincts screaming the truth. "They're herding us," he muttered, "driving us into a trap." Claudia's heart sank. "Then what do we do?" Rock stood, knife glinting in the fading light. "We don't run from the trap, we break it." But Claudia knew what that meant. Another fight, another storm of bullets and blood. And with every passing hour, Anthony's strength faded more. The boy's courage burned bright, but his body was frail, fragile against the desert's cruelty. As the sun bled into the horizon, Rock led them into the jagged rocks, the only cover in miles. Shadows stretched long, hiding both prey and predator. Somewhere in the dark, Santos's men were waiting. The noose was tightening. And Rock knew that soon the desert itself would decide who lived, and who would be swallowed by the sand. The ambush came swift and merciless. From the shadows of the rocks, gunfire split the night. The desert exploded with chaos, bullets tearing through stone, sparks lighting the darkness like thunder in a storm. Claudia dragged Anthony to cover, her scream drowned by the crack of rifles. Rock moved like a phantom, blade and fist striking with the fury of a man who knew hesitation meant death. But even warriors cannot shield everyone. A shot echoed louder than the rest. Anthony cried out, his small body collapsing into the sand. Claudia's heart shattered as she clutched him, her hands already stained with his blood. "No, no, no, stay with me, Anthony." The boy's breaths came shallow, his face pale beneath the moonlight. Claudia's tears fell hot against his skin. "Please, God, not him, take me, not him." Rock knelt beside them, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with fury. He pressed Claudia's trembling hands aside and examined the wound. The bullet had passed clean through, but the bleeding was heavy. "He's not gone," Rock growled. "Not if we stop the bleeding now." With practiced precision he tore strips of cloth, pressing them hard against the wound. Anthony winced, but his voice was steady, fragile, yet brave. "Claudia, don't cry. I'll be okay." Those words, soft, trembling but filled with courage, struck deeper than any bullet. Claudia sobbed, holding his hand as if her grip alone could keep him alive. Rock's hands moved quickly, sealing the wound as best he could. "He's tougher than you think," he muttered, but inside rage built like wildfire. This boy, this innocent heart, had no place in a world of bullets and betrayal. As Anthony slipped into unconsciousness, Claudia kissed his forehead, whispering through broken sobs, "You're my reason, my only reason." Rock stood, blood on his hands and fury in his soul. He had tried to walk away from the fight, but now with Anthony wounded, it was no longer about survival. It was personal. The night grew colder, but the fire that burned between them was one of desperation, not warmth. Rock had managed to stop Anthony's bleeding, binding the wound with rough cloth and steady hands. Yet he knew the desert gave no favors. Infection, thirst, exhaustion, all could finish what the bullet had begun. Claudia held her brother close, whispering through her tears, "Stay with me, Anthony. You can't leave me now. Not here. Not like this." Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath the sorrow. She had carried him through too much to lose him now. Rock crouched nearby, his eyes sweeping the horizon. Shadows moved in the distance, hunters still lurking, waiting for the moment when their prey would be weakest. He knew they didn't have time to rest, but he also knew Anthony couldn't survive another mile without strength. He moved quickly, gathering dry brush and striking sparks until a flame roared to life. The fire wasn't just for warmth, it was a weapon. Predators feared fire. Men feared what they could not see through smoke and flame. "Why light it?" Claudia asked sharply, panic in her voice. "They'll see us." "That's the point," Rock answered, his voice low, steady. "Fire tells predators we're not running. It tells them we're ready." The flames danced high, casting long shadows against the rocks. To Santos's men watching from afar, it wasn't weakness on display. It was defiance. As the fire crackled, Rock knelt beside Anthony, placing his grandfather's knife into the boy's trembling hands. "Hold it," he said firmly. "Not to fight, but to remember. You're stronger than this wound, stronger than this desert. Don't let it break you." Anthony, barely conscious, gripped the knife with surprising force. His fragile voice whispered, "Like a warrior." Rock gave a single nod. Like a warrior. The fire roared higher, and for the first time that night Claudia realized survival wasn't about hiding, it was about fighting back. The fire burned bright against the night sky when another set of headlights cut across the desert. A truck rolled to a stop, dust swirling around its tires. Sheriff Larry stepped out, his silhouette framed by the flames. His hat hung low, but even in the shadows, Rock could see the guilt etched across his face. Claudia's body tensed instantly, her hand shielding Anthony. "What is he doing here?" she hissed, her voice sharp with suspicion. Rock didn't answer. He already knew. He had seen betrayal before, in the way Larry's eyes shifted, in the hesitation of his steps. The desert taught men to reveal themselves without words. Larry raised his hands as if to show he meant no harm. "Rock, listen. I didn't come here to fight. I came to explain." Rock's voice was cold steel. "Explain what? That you sold us out? That Santos owns you like he owns half this desert?" Larry's jaw tightened. For a moment he tried to hide it, but the weight of his own cowardice pressed harder than Rock's accusation. He let out a bitter laugh, more broken than amused. "You don't understand what it's like, Rock. Men like Santo, they don't give you a choice. I owed money, gambling, stupid mistakes. One night he showed up, paid it all, and suddenly my life was his. What was I supposed to do? Say no? You don't say no to the devil." Claudia's eyes blazed with fury. "So you chose to betray us? To betray him?" She gestured toward Rock, her voice trembling with rage. "The only man who ever called you a friend." Larry's shoulders slumped, his voice cracked. "You think I wanted this? I hate myself for it every damn day. But when Santos has his hand around your throat, you either breathe his air, or you don't breathe at all." Rock's fists clenched at his sides. The man he once trusted stood before him, a shadow of the sheriff he claimed to be. "You had a choice, Larry," Rock growled. "You just chose the coward's path." For a moment, silence weighed heavier than the desert itself. Then Larry whispered, almost pleading, "Maybe I did, but I'm here now, and maybe I can make it right." But Rock knew some sins can't be erased by words, and in the desert, confession doesn't always buy redemption. The fire cracked in the silence after Larry's confession, but the desert was never silent for long. A low hum rolled across the sand, growing louder with each second, the sound of engines. Black trucks appeared on the horizon, headlights cutting through the night like the eyes of predators. Claudia's heart pounded. She pulled Anthony closer, shielding him as if her body could stop the storm that was coming. Rock's eyes narrowed. He didn't need words to understand. Santos's men had arrived. Dozens of shadows poured from the trucks, rifles gleaming under the moon. Their boots stomped the earth in unison, a marching of death that made the ground tremble. At their center stood a man, tall and broad, his presence heavier than the weapons pointed at them. His voice carried like thunder as he stepped forward. "Rock!" the man called, his accent thick, his tone dripping with venom. "The desert speaks of you, a ghost, a warrior. But even ghosts can bleed." Behind him, the others laughed, their voices cruel and cold. The cartel didn't come for negotiation. They came to crush, to break, to remind the desert who it belonged to. Larry froze, his body caught between the firelight and the advancing horde. Claudia glared at him, her voice trembling with fury. "This is your redemption bringing them to us?" Larry stammered, guilt choking him. But Rock had no patience for his weakness. He stepped forward, knife in hand, his shadow cast long against the flames. "If Santos wants a war," Rock growled, "he'll get one." The men raised their rifles in unison, the metallic click echoing like a death sentence. Claudia held her breath. Anthony whimpered softly, and Rock stood tall, ready to face the inevitable storm. The desert, once silent, now screamed with the promise of blood. From the wave of cartel soldiers emerged a towering brute, scarred face, broken nose, arms thick as tree trunks. They called him Bruno Zack, the butcher of the desert. Once a fighter in underground rings, now Santos's favorite executioner. Every scar on his body was a memory of violence. Every kill he made a story whispered in fear. He pushed past the other men, eyes fixed on Rock. "I've heard of you," he said, his voice gravel grinding against the silence. "The warrior who hides in the sand. The one who killed in the ring and ran away. Tonight you fight me, and you die." The cartel soldiers roared in approval, surrounding them in a circle of firelight. Claudia clutched Anthony tighter, her heart thundering. Larry stepped back, his face pale. He knew this wasn't just a fight. It was execution staged for all to see. Rock didn't flinch. He stood tall, knife in hand, his eyes locked on Zack's. He remembered every word his grandfather had told him. A true warrior does not fear death. He fears dishonor. Zack charged, fists like hammers swinging through the air. Rock dodged, but the brute's strength was monstrous. One blow grazed his shoulder, sending pain shooting through his body. Another struck his ribs, nearly dropping him. Blood trickled from his lip, the desert spinning around him. But Rock was no stranger to pain. He absorbed it, embraced it, let it sharpen his focus. He moved with precision, striking quick, aiming for weakness. A slash to Zack's arm, a knee to his gut. Still the butcher laughed, as if pain was his fuel. "Is that all, warrior?" Zack spat, charging again. Rock steadied his breathing, knife raised. "No," he growled. "This is only the beginning." The circle of fire tightened, soldiers chanting for blood. Claudia's prayers whispered against Anthony's trembling hand. And in that circle, two men, one beast of brutality, the other a ghost of honor, clashed in a battle the desert itself would remember. The butcher swung with rage. Rock fought with purpose. And soon the sand itself would choose which warrior walked away. The circle of cartel soldiers roared louder, their chants echoing through the desert like a ritual of blood. Rock staggered back, ribs aching, vision blurred from the brute force of Bruno Zack's fists. The butcher of the desert grinned, savoring the moment, his chest heaving like a beast that lived only for violence. Claudia's cries pierced the chaos. "Rock, don't give up." Her voice wasn't just desperation, it was fire, and it struck something deep within him. Rock tasted blood in his mouth, spat it into the sand, and felt something awaken. A flame he had buried long ago, the same fury that once made him a killer in the ring. But this time, it wasn't rage for himself. It was vengeance. Vengeance for Anthony's wound, for Claudia's suffering, for every life Santos had crushed under his empire. Zack charged again, laughing, his fist swinging like a hammer meant to break bone. Rock stepped aside at the last second, blade flashing under the firelight. Steel tore into flesh. Zack howled, stumbling, clutching his arm as blood gushed freely. The soldiers shouted, some with shock, others with delight at the spectacle. Rock pressed forward, his movements sharp, ruthless, unstoppable. Every strike was precise, every slash fueled not by hate alone, but by justice. "Tell Santos," Rock growled between blows. "I'm coming for him." Zack roared, lunging one last time, but Rock met him head-on, driving his knife deep into the brute's side. The giant collapsed to his knees, gasping, his laughter gone. replaced by silence. And then he fell, lifeless, into the sand. The circle broke. The cartel soldiers' cheers turned to murmurs, unease rippling through them. The warrior they thought broken had risen, and his vengeance burned hotter than ever. Rock stood over the fallen butcher, chest heaving, knife dripping. For the first time, Claudia looked at him not as a stranger, not even as a savior, but as a force of reckoning. The desert was no longer just their prison. With Rock's vengeance ignited, it had become their battlefield. The body of Bruno Zach lay still in the sand, the firelight casting monstrous shadows across his fallen frame. The cartel soldiers shifted uneasily, their confidence shaken. They had just witnessed the butcher of the desert fall, and if a giant like Zach could bleed, so could they. But amidst the fear, another figure stepped forward. Tall, sharp, with eyes like cold steel. Santos's second-in-command. His voice cut through the murmurs. "This ends now. Claudia Valente belongs to Santos. Hand her over, and perhaps we'll let the others live." Claudia's breath caught. She looked down at Anthony, still unconscious, his wound bound but fragile. She looked at Rock, his chest heaving, blood on his hands, rage still burning in his eyes. And then she stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. "You want me?" she shouted, her voice echoing in the desert night. "Then take me. But you will never touch him. You will never touch my brother." The soldiers stirred, surprised at her defiance. Rock's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. He knew what she was doing, bargaining with her life to buy time, to protect Anthony. The lieutenant sneered. "Brave words. But Santos doesn't deal in mercy. He deals in ownership. You are his, whether you walk or crawl." Claudia stood taller, her face a mask of fire and steel. "No, I am not his. I stole from him. I outsmarted him. And I am the only one who can give him back what he wants, $20 million. That money dies with me unless I choose otherwise." The soldiers fell silent. Even they knew the weight of her words. Without her, Santos's fortune was locked beyond reach. Rock stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Claudia, don't." But Claudia held her ground. Her eyes met his, a silent plea. "Protect Anthony. If I fall, keep him safe." Her bargain wasn't with the cartel, it was with Rock. And as the desert wind howled, carrying her words into the night, one truth became clear. Claudia Valente was no longer just a fugitive. She was the key to Santos's empire. The desert grew still as a new shadow emerged from the darkness. The men parted, their hardened faces turning to stone. The air itself seemed to tighten. Santos had arrived. He wasn't dressed like a kingpin. No gold chains, no flashy arrogance. His power was quieter, colder. Her suit dusty from the journey, eyes dark as the abyss, and a calm smile that chilled the blood more than any threat. Men like Santos didn't need to raise their voices. Death walked in their silence. "Rock," he said, his tone almost cordial, as though greeting an old friend. "I've heard of you, the desert's warrior, the ghost who hides from his own sins, and now here you stand, protecting thieves who stole what's mine." Rock stepped forward, body tense, knife steady at his side. "You rule through fear. You poison everything you touch. Tonight that ends." Santos chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You think this is a story about justice? About heroes and villains?" His gaze shifted to Claudia. "No, this is about money. 20 million. The only thing in this world worth bleeding for." Claudia stood firm, though her body trembled. "You'll never touch that money. You'll never own me." For the first time, Santos's smile cracked. His eyes hardened, and he nodded to his men. "Kill the warrior. Bring me the girl alive." Gunfire erupted, but Rock moved like lightning. Years of survival, of rage, of discipline unleashed in a storm of violence. He weaved through bullets, striking with precision, turning the cartel's own chaos against them. Men fell one by one, but Santos watched calmly, his hands behind his back, like a general waiting for the dust to settle. At last, the battlefield emptied, silence broken only by the crackle of fire and the groans of the dying. Rock stood across from Santos, chest heaving, blood dripping from his blade. Santos removed his jacket slowly, his smile returning. "Then let's finish this ourselves." Two men, two forces, one born of honor, the other of greed, stepped into the circle of fire. The duel wasn't just for survival, it was for the soul of the desert itself. The flames danced wildly, casting monstrous shadows on the sand as Rock and Santos circled each other. One was a man shaped by the law he had once broken. The other, a king of corruption, ruling through fear and blood. Santos moved with precision, his strikes controlled, cold, calculated. He wasn't the brute Zack had been, he was the serpent, coiled and patient, waiting for the moment to strike. Rock countered with raw force and instinct, every movement honed by years of survival. Each clash echoed like thunder, steel and fists colliding beneath the vast, silent sky. Claudia held Anthony close, tears streaking her dirt-covered face as she watched. Her voice broke the night. "Rock, don't let him win. You're all we have left." But inside Rock's mind, another battle raged. Was this fight about protecting Claudia and Anthony, about ending Santos's reign? Or was it about something darker? The fury he had buried, the taste of blood he swore never to crave again. Every strike Santos landed reignited that old fire, the one that whispered, "You like this. You were born for this." Rock gritted his teeth, fighting not just his enemy, but the monster within. Santos sneered, his words cutting deeper than his blows. "You're no guardian, Rock. You're like me, a killer who hides behind excuses. The difference is, I embrace it. You lie to yourself." The words stung because part of them was true, and as Rock pinned Santos to the ground, knife raised high, time itself seemed to stop. Claudia's voice pierced the silence. "Rock, don't become him." His hand trembled. Was this justice, ending a tyrant to free the desert? Or was it revenge, letting the darkness consume him once again? In that moment, the desert held its breath, because the choice Rock made would not just decide Santos's fate, it would decide his own soul. The knife hovered above Santos's chest, gleaming in the firelight. Rock's hand shook, his heart pounding with the weight of choice. For a moment, the warrior inside screamed for vengeance, demanding blood to wash away years of pain. But Claudia's voice echoed louder than the rage. "Don't become him." Rock's breath slowed, his grip tightened, then lowered. Instead of plunging the blade into Santos, he slammed the hilt against his temple. The cartel king collapsed unconscious, defeated not by death, but by restraint. Silence fell. The soldiers who remained fled into the desert, their loyalty dissolving without their master's command. For the first time in years, the night belonged to the desert itself. Claudia rushed to Anthony, who stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open. "Claudia." "Rock," he whispered, his voice frail but alive. Relief washed over her as tears spilled down her cheeks. At dawn, Rock carried Anthony in his arms, Claudia walking beside him, until they reached a place his grandfather had once called sacred, the mountain of their ancestors. There, the desert stretched endlessly, vast and eternal, yet peaceful. They buried their pain in that sacred soil. Anthony, though scarred, found strength in the words Rock had given him. Like a warrior, Claudia found hope in knowing her brother had survived, and that the money she once thought was their curse might now serve as their freedom. And Rock? He finally found something he had lost long ago. Not redemption, not glory, but peace. He laid his grandfather's knife into the earth, whispering to the spirits of those who came before him. "I am no longer running. I am no longer hiding. I am home." As the sun rose over the sacred mountain, the desert no longer felt like exile. It felt like belonging, and for the first time in his life, Rock is the desert guardian was at rest.